American Top 40.
Right now we're at number 33, and this happens more often than not, it seems. Many songs that have been hits in the past 2 decades are becoming hits all over again. Such is the case with the hit at number 33. In 1958, Eddie Cochran had a hit with the song. Blue Cheer repeated in 1968. And now, The Who do it all over again. And the weather's right for it. The Summertime Blues. Debut song, Summertime Blues, The Who from England. And we do this every week from Hollywood. My name's Casey Kasem. The countdown continues on American Top 40.
The hits from coast to coast.
This is Casey Kasem on American Top 40. And now, the current hit by the group that literally shook the walls of the institution that is America's main fortress and chief presenter of classical music, the Met. Until last year, throughout the 90-year history of the New York Metropolitan Opera, only a couple of times had anything other than classical music been presented on its stage. And then it had to be an act as widely appealing to all ages and tastes as Judy Garland. But early last summer, that sound barrier was really shattered, and oddly enough by something called an opera, a rock opera called Tommy. The work is a rock standard now, composed and performed by The Who from England. But of that day at the Met in June 1970, when The Who's big amplifiers began to shake, Time magazine reported that the assistant manager of the Met cowered inside a soundproof booth at the rear of the hall, touching his fingertips incredulously to the trembling walls. Well, that's how it was for an hour and 20 minutes. The walls themselves didn't come down, but tradition sure did, because that was the first and only time that a rock group has ever played the Met. From their album Who's Next, here's their latest hit single, Won't Get Fooled Again. At number 34 this week, The Who. Last week, number 39. This week, number 34. It's The Who from England and Won't Get Fooled Again.
The hits from coast to coast. American Top 40.
Now I have the current hit by the British supergroup, whose wacky drummer has earned a reputation for his strange sense of humor. And the offbeat stunts that he likes to pull, too. Even when he's being serious, drummer Keith Moon has a very distinctive way of expressing his feelings. Like the time several years ago when he and the group were having dinner with some friends in Cincinnati at a restaurant overlooking the Ohio River. During the meal, the conversation got around to what makes a superstar? And after listening to several other opinions, Keith Moon decided to make his own statement. He simply stood up and said, I'll show you who's a superstar. And then he sprinted across the room, sailed out of the open window into the Ohio River 60 feet below. Pretty normal behavior for superstar drummer Keith Moon. At number 28, here are The Who with Squeezebox. The Who at number 28, moving up from 36 this week with Squeezebox.
American Top 40.
Well, now we're up to the second of our debut songs in AT40 this week, and it's by the only supergroup in the history of the charts to have only one top 10 single. It almost goes without saying that in order to attain the status of supergroup, a band has to continuously chart with big hit singles. But the four Englishmen who make up the original wild and crazy group are the exception. They started out with a minor chart record back in 1965. Then they followed that up with a song that failed to make the 40, but went on to become a rock classic. The song, My Generation. Since then, this group has had several big-selling albums, including classics like the trend-setting rock opera, Tommy. And from the beginning of their career, they carved out their own special niche in rock history by putting on some of the wildest instrument-smashing concerts ever seen. Since 1965, a total of 19 of their singles have made the charts. But surprisingly, only one of those songs has made it into the top 10. That was I Can See for Miles, which squeaked into the top 10 at number 9 back in 1967. The group is one of the best-known and most influential English groups to cross the Atlantic, The Who. And this week, The Who take another shot at the top 10 with their 20th chart record. Coming in at number 35, the highest debuting song of the week, here are The Who with Who Are You? Debuting at number 35, The Who, back on the chart after a couple of years with Who Are You? From Hollywood, This is Casey Kasem on American Top 40, and we're counting down the 40 hottest records in the nation on our way to the most popular song in America this week. Of all the groups that came over in the British invasion of the 60s, the only one to stay together and continue working with all their original members intact have been The Who. Now, of course, they're mourning the recent death of their drummer, Keith Moon. And when Peter Townsend was asked about the future of the band, he said, "We're more determined than ever to carry on, and we want the spirit of the group to which Keith contributed so much to go on. Although no human being can ever take his place. We loved him, and he's gone." The Who and their third week on American Top 40, moving up 3 to number 26 with Who Are You? This is Casey on AT40 in Hollywood, and now I have the current hit by The Who and my story about their unpredictable late drummer, Keith Moon. Over the years, Keith more than earned a reputation for his flamboyant, off-the-wall behavior. And there are many classic stories about some of his zany antics. For example, the time about 9 years ago when Keith Moon was taking a vacation in Germany. He was spending a few days there all by himself to rest up in the middle of a concert tour. Suddenly, he remembered a big London concert that the group was scheduled to play that night. Well, he frantically hopped in a cab, rushed off to the airport, and discovered there were no regularly scheduled flights that would get him back to London on time. So, good trooper that he was, Keith decided to charter the first available plane, which turned out to be a huge 707 jetliner. Before he took off, he sent a wire from the airport to Peter Townsend, the group's leader, asking Peter to meet him at the airport, which of course Townsend did. And what he saw was a huge 707 designed to carry about 130 people, taxi up to the terminal, where it unloaded one passenger, Keith Moon. And then Peter Townsend reminded the absent-minded drummer that their concert had been canceled. This week, The Who climbed 3 notches higher on AT40 with their latest. At number 19, their song is Who Are You? The Who, one of 7 English acts in our countdown this week. At number 19, moving up 3 with Who Are You? 18 hits to number 1 and counting them down. This is Casey on American Top 40 in Hollywood, and now we're up to the latest hit by the super rock band whose leader recently fell asleep on stage in the middle of a concert. The Rip Van Winkle of rock is Pete Townsend, leader of The Who, and here's his story. Not long ago, Townsend was asked to participate in a benefit concert in London. Well, Pete had just finished a solo album and decided to do some of the songs from that LP. But he was very nervous. Nervous because, according to the show's producer, Pete Townsend had never performed solo without any backup band before. Well, as showtime approached, Pete Townsend became more and more nervous and finally asked the producer if he could have a glass of brandy to calm his nerves. The producer did the courteous thing and sent a full bottle to him. He said, "I figured Pete would take it home. But when we went to get him, there wasn't much brandy left, and Pete was looking very mellow." Well, Pete Townsend did all right during the first 2 songs, and then was joined on stage by classical guitarist John Williams. They did a duet in which both men played acoustic guitars while sitting down. And Pete, while he was sitting down, fell asleep, sound asleep. The producer says that hardly anyone noticed because John Williams was playing a solo passage at the time, and somehow Townsend woke up just in time to finish the piece. Later, when a reporter asked the producer if he planned to release the film that had been shot of the concert, including the Sleeping Beauty scene, the producer said, "No, I think Pete would do me great bodily harm if I did that." Well, this week, The Who and their leader, Pete Townsend, are at number 18 with You Better You Bet. At number 18 for the 3rd week in a row with their 15th top 40 hit, The Who and You Better You Bet, as the countdown continues.
The hits from coast to coast.
Now, we're up to the latest hit by a rock and roll supergroup whose lead guitarist was told by doctors that his profession was making him deaf. Years of being subjected to loud music played just below the pain threshold can turn you deaf long before your time. And 7 years ago, that's what Pete Townsend's doctors said was happening to him. As a flamboyant guitarist of The Who, Pete had already been playing rock for more than a decade. During a long U.S. tour, he began to have terrible earaches. He went to several top specialists. These doctors' opinions were all the same. If Pete continued performing at his current rate, he'd be deaf by the time he was 40. Pete said it was a terrifying prospect. He finished that tour with The Who and then put a stop on future plans until he could figure out what to do. He tried wearing earplugs for a while, and they definitely helped against the tremendously loud levels The Who played at. The earache stopped. Pete's hearing improved, and he came to a decision. Rock and roll was his life, and if it was going to affect his hearing, so be it. Today, at 37 years old, Pete says he stopped worrying about it and stopped wearing earplugs. And he says he'll take the consequences. Of course, it helps that The Who tour far less frequently than they used to. They're currently in the middle of what they call their first farewell tour. And their current hit is in the countdown this week at number 30. Here's Athena, The Who. With their 16th top 40 hit, third week on the chart, now at number 30, The Who and Athena. Now on with our survey of the 40 top hits in the nation based on the official Billboard charts. This is American Top 40. I'm Casey Kasem, and the countdown continues. You know, one thing that most artists agree about is that being on the road is hard, exhausting work. And when they reach the upper levels of stardom, quite a few performers make life on the road a lot easier for themselves and more interesting by asking for and receiving some pretty unusual extras. For instance, Barry Manilow has a dog whose name is Bagel. Now, in his performance contract, it says that steak has to be provided for his dog for every show. There's a line in the Jay Giles Band contract which assures the group that a chilled bottle of Thunderbird wine be provided for lead guitarist Jay Giles before every show. But few rock bands have a more luxurious clause in their contracts than The Who. Promoters are contractually obligated to supply them with a pre- and post-concert buffet consisting of sliced breast of duckling, roast lamb, lobster Bellevue, North Pacific salmon, rabbit pâté, and a broad selection of fine vintage wines. And they aren't kidding. AT40 writer Meryl Schindler saw that succulent spread backstage at The Who's recent farewell concert here in L.A. Not a bad feed, and it sure takes the edge off those months spent on the road. At number 28 on American Top 40 this week, here are the extremely well-fed Who, a band currently on their final tour of North America with Athena. Roger Daltrey, Pete Townsend, John Entwistle, and Kenny Jones. They are The Who on American Top 40 at number 28, third week in a row with Athena. 27 big ones to number 1, and we're counting them down.
Hits from coast to coast.